Okay, so what surprised me, just like Samantha said, we were talking about about the group and how we are feeding our teams, like how inspiral activities and values can help us in our team. And I was very surprised listening to the other members, and I found many similarities of things we are facing in our daily work. So that was very interesting for me.
Great. Who's next?
I can pop.
Great. Go, Tanya.
How many? Oh, can folks hear me?
Yeah. So Swati, go. Yep.
Okay, sorry. I was surprised by how many different kinds of centralized organizations there are out there, and I was surprised at how easy it is to contact them and ask them if they want to chat.
I'll pop next. Just to bounce off of that, I was surprised that we got a response. Saraswati sent out an email on behalf of our team, and we got a really quick response. So that was pretty great and surprising.
Cool. Mary?
Me too. I was super surprised by that. I reached out to a bunch of folks at Buffer, and now we're all friends.
So cool. Yeah, the generosity in this community you'll find is overwhelming. So I'm glad you've already had that little experience. Who's next?
I can go. I think this week I actually took the personal values assessment, and I did that activity where I looked at like a tricky situation that I've been in. There were kind of 3 tricky situations, and I started to really dig down into how I behave, and was super surprised to notice a little trend of like not kind of speaking up when I don't agree with something, and kind of just becoming very quiet and just being like, okay, if that's what you want to do, that's great. But actually, in a way, I wonder if it's also being of disservice to the person because I'm not like providing any feedback for them. So yeah, I was really surprised by that, kind of watching that little trend emerge.
Thanks, Tanya. Camilla, just you probably have caught on. The question for the check-in is, what surprised you this week? So Josh, Brian, Camilla, Sam, who's next? Sam.
I'll go. What surprised me this week? So one thing that was, not necessarily surprising, but interesting to look at was my trigger response to to doing homework. A lot of the times, this is something that I haven't felt almost like since college, and it brings me. I'm in this consensus mesh pattern that I've learned, and a lot of time it's very emergent. So just like sitting and doing like homework it wasn't a bad surprise. It was a good surprise, but it was like my feelings towards homework were surprising to me again.
Thanks, Samantha.
I'm actually ready to pop now.
Go, Camilla.
Yeah, sorry everyone. As Sammy were saying this, I observed the same behavior within myself. What I realized was that I have maintained the same habits, which is that I feel the most productive when I have like 4 hours left to do something. And then it's like cram time, and it's like, and then okay, done. So that was one. The second, like beautiful realization and understanding that I found was by reading my group's profile. How other people see you what's important to you and how to work with you. Yeah, some of them were actually, yeah, the level of honesty and vulnerability was very touching and moving, honestly. And I also, within reading those profiles, I also realized that without consciously being aware of it, I subconsciously had preconceived notions about the people, and I haven't even met them. So it was very good for me to be proven, to be shown my predisposition, and to be so wrong about all of them.
Wow, thanks, Camilla.
I can
Brian.
pop next. I hope the audio is okay. I apologize. I'll be on a more stable connection soon. For me, the surprise was the weird sort of resilience of the body when you're doing something you're passionate about. You can be in that red zone for so long that it's almost astounding. And that's what the week called for. But what was weird was how argumentative the mind was about it at various times. I would wake up in the morning and I knew I was going to be good because I knew I was about to go do something I was passionate about, and I know there's a history of being able to pull through when that's the case. But for some strange reason, like my mind, despite all this experience, feels so uncertain and is almost like telling me it's going to catastrophically fail today. Your energy is going to, dip out when you need it. And it's weird how that was a surprise for me this week, is just to start to see that pattern and that dialogue inside me.
Thanks, Brian. And lucky last, Mr. Kreitz.
Yeah, so I was kind of surprised, like looking at these other teal organizations, at how much progress other companies have made in this domain. Like Consensus is my first experience with this kind of work, and it seems like Consensus is like, oh, we're breaking new ground, we're creating a new way to work and all this stuff. And like, yes, it is kind of new, but there's also a lot of people that have done stuff that we can learn from and we can incorporate their things. And one thing I really like about the work that these other organizations are doing is they're so transparent. We can literally just go and read. Like we looked at Inspiral, and they published their handbook. It's so transparent. All their agreements are right there, not just for transparent within the company, but transparent to me, like as just general public. So like, that's awesome. It was a pleasant surprise.
Thanks, everybody. I'm glad I asked that question. I never quite know what question I'm going to ask until I'm here. So thanks for that. So the way that these Friday sessions work is each team has the opportunity, just looking at the time boxes. So I'm going to give each team 10 minutes. And you have a choice. You can either present your work in progress, where you've got to so far, before you publish your work to the drive over the weekend, or you can just have a conversation or invite a conversation about what you noticed about being in the process. Either or, there's kind of no rules here. If you wanted to present something maybe for feedback so that you can refine what you're thinking about, that's also great. The time is yours to reflect as a team about what you managed to achieve over the last 4 days. So I will call on the team to go first. So I'd love for and I'm sorry, it's frustrating when not everybody's here, but maybe we'll talk about that next time and see how we feel about that. I will ask the Spirograph team, so Samantha, Edson, and Josh, since you're the team with most people here, to take us through what you've learned in any way that you'd like.
How do we want to do this, team?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Josh. Do you want to drive it similar to how we did during yesterday's meeting, or we just kind of walk through the 3 questions the way that we framed them, and then we can, Edson and I can jump in whenever?
Yeah, that sounds good. So we looked at Inspiral because we thought it would be cool to look at it from the outside, like us doing research as external people, and then we have people, we're working with people in Inspiral so they can offer another perspective. But we thought we would present kind of by just looking at the last question in the homework document. And the question is, how can these patterns that we've harvested be useful to you, your team, and the mesh? So we broke that down into the 3 questions. How can the patterns be relevant to you? How can the patterns be relevant to your team? And how can the patterns be relevant to the mesh? And we kind of just took our research and took some nuggets out of it and just like pasted some bullet points under each question. So I'll just kind of go through the bullet points of how can these patterns be relevant to you. There's a mindset shift. This first point is kind of relevant to the idea of content dusting, where everybody takes ownership of documentation. If you see something that needs changed, you just initiate the change. Like you can write up a change and then contact the author and say, hey, I noticed this needs updating. I made the update. Can you just publish this for us? And that's kind of like doing your part in the organism and taking ownership of everything that needs doing in the organism. And we kind of had the analogy Sam brought up in the office. Like if paper towels run out, some people will just say, hey, we should get an office manager and we need, so they can restock the paper towels as opposed to just going down to the store and buying a roll of paper towels. If everybody took ownership of everything that needs doing within the company, regardless if it's your spoke or whatever needs to be done on the team, like mesh-wide, just stepping up and taking ownership.
Like ants. It's one analogy.
Yeah, I guess Joe uses the analogy of ants. So another point is consensus skills development. So building human skills to solve problems in a way that is inclusive and acceptable to everyone. That's something that Inspiral like embodies in their values, and that's something that we think consensus should as like company-wide, but also it's building human skills. So it starts at an individual level. Then also leadership skills, developing those, collaborative decision-making, team building, inclusion, and transparency. And then mesh citizen skills kind of falls under the ownership umbrella, but also nonviolent communication, collaborative participation, transparency, and a growth mindset to iterate and learn, because we're all growing individually and professionally while we're here at Consensus. So I don't know, Sam, do you want to take the team question?
To how we can implement these practices in our teams. And one thing that we talked about was core agreements and how that can be used as an accountability mechanism, because a lot of times, or at least from what I've seen or have talked to a lot of different people in the mesh, is that a lack of agreements generally leads to lack of trust, bad coordination and execution, and that ultimately leads to a loss of morale. And so I think if you can be proactive with setting up those agreements, making sure that they're written down somewhere, that really will create a supportive environment where people feel safe to do their job, not feel as if they or have to walk on eggshells at any point in time. And that making agreements and defining how everybody can support each other will ultimately and experiment and rely on others for guidance to help them learn best practices or whatever it may be. Edson, do you want to take on how that can be relevant to the mesh?
Yeah, sure. So for the mesh, we found relevant the Inspiral handbook, as there is the central place where all the information is there. So we think that it would be nice to, in consensus, to have the central repository of information. And another thing that we found very interesting was the usage of collaborative tools for decision making in the whole Inspiral organization, and also this analogy between groups in there and spokes. So we think that consensus can improve this proposal mechanism by using maybe a collaborative tool. And then some questions that arise is, are Sparans ventures analogous to consensus spokes?
I just want to add to what Sam was saying about the agreements and transparency. In the Inspiral handbook, all of the, I don't know if it's all the agreements, but they have a large list of agreements that members make, and they're public. So it's totally transparent. Like when you make an agreement, everybody knows what the agreement was. And I think that's something that might be lacking in consensus. Transparent agreements between spokes and individuals and teams. At least with my team, I think we could make formal agreements as opposed to these implicit agreements.
Sounds like those could live in TMNT.
Totally.
You've got 3 minutes left, team. How do you want to use it?
We had this question from the handbook. It looks like Inspiral Ventures might be similar to consensus spokes. Can you speak to that a little bit, Susan?
Yeah, sure. They are. It's very similar in the sense that the ventures kind of manifest and spring up from the rich soil that is Inspiral. I guess the difference is that Inspiral doesn't fund or hold an equity position in any of the ventures. We did experiment with that at the beginning with holding equity stakes, but there's never been enough money in the system to be able to do that well. So I think, yes, on the one hand, just like I see in consensus, a lot of the spokes sort of springing up from the soil that is created here. So that part's similar, but the money flows are a little bit different. But in that sense, I feel like there's a lot potentially that consensus can derive from the idea that ventures are actively contributing to the whole, to the foundation, rather than expecting, I guess, funding from the foundation. I know that it works kind of bilaterally at consensus, but I think that feels to me like the biggest kind of difference.
That's interesting. I hear no equity, and I'm like, whoa, what? That's the same, like, kind of response in my mind that I had, and that's just because, like, I see so many different, people. One of the most difficult conversations that folks have, like entity creation and spin outs, and a lot, building cap table around that. Usually pretty controversial. So hearing about a company that doesn't, I don't know, it's
yeah, and I mean, our expectation is that when the ventures are feeling abundant enough to share back their abundance with the center, they will. So maybe that's a kind of naive way of thinking about equity, but that's kind of how we hold it philosophically.
I think that's great. I wish we did that.
Yeah, I just started digging into that part of the handbook this morning, so I didn't get too deep in it, but it's cool that it's there, so I can go in later and really see how Inspiral does it. Does anyone
guys,
have any questions?
Can you get the handbook off of their website, Josh?
Yep. Yeah, we linked to it a few times in our write-up, but I'll also post it. Okay, do we have a Slack channel?
We do. Your assignment for next week is already in there. Great. Thanks, team. That was amazing. Anybody else have any last questions for I've given actually the team's name, for the Spirograph team this week? Brian?
Yeah, this might be a question for the team or for Susan, but I'm sorry, I just for clarity, the ventures don't produce separate legal entities, or is it that they don't produce separate legal entities at any point?
No, they are all separate legal entities.
They are separate legal entities, and then they have separate shares as a result of that.
The way that they relate to the Inspiral Foundation is down to them, but the Inspiral Foundation does not hold equity in any of the ventures.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, that's what I was trying to understand from the question, was whether it was like just that there is no separation, and that's the other way around. It's
all separated, all distributed.
Yeah, I've seen there's an interesting case from Basecamp related that sounds similar to what Inspiral is doing. That's cool.
Great. Mandala team, why don't you go next? Brian, Mary, Camilla. You've got 10 minutes.
We worked pretty asynchronously because of how hard it was from time zones to connect. So do you guys want to organize on the fly and quickly shout out how we want to present? Because I don't think we made a decision about that.
That's right. Yeah, let's follow your lead.
Okay.
Yes, we'll figure it out on the fly.
Cool. Anyone in a position to screen share? Because I think that could be kind of fun to share the document, and then we can walk through it sequentially. Mary is awesome. Thanks. And Mary, if you're comfortable, maybe why don't you kick us off, and then Camilla and myself can jump in to add our own thoughts and some of the research that we had along the way. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So we took Buffer as a company to look at, and just link out to them if you guys want to see. Or is everybody familiar? Yeah. Anyone not know about Buffer?
I don't know about Buffer.
So I'll put them in the chat really quickly. There you go. Okay, so basically we used a doc to organize our research and in identifying patterns. At the individual level, the summary of it is basically, they're an organization that's hugely committed to self-improvement and recognizing humans are more than their jobs. And they have a whole culture blog that's dedicated to topics around self-improvement, podcasts, videos. And another pattern that we identified was around self-reflection as being demonstrated around the blogging and the authors, the very large spectrum of authors. So let's see. The stories are unbelievable. They're all incredibly inspirational. And another thing that I noticed was that they're breaking out of social norms around, measuring what you're worth and stuff like that. So, Camilla, Brian, do you have anything to add to this patterns that you saw around at Buffer around at the individual level?
Sure. I'll go ahead and add. So what I've noticed is that everyone, most people who are in this workplace, they all of them share a genuine passion for empowering communities, for helping people, for finding solutions through technology. And what I've also noticed is that they their values, their personal values, align with the company's values. So that's the thing that I have noticed. Brian, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, that reflection and introspection, like I found it really fascinating to read through the blogs over the history. So they've been at this a long time, and they would write notes over top of old blogs. Like they'd gone back and retrospected on things they were doing. They wrote entire blogs that were retrospectives of a decision they'd made previously. And they were very personal in the quotes that they brought forward. Like the reflections were reflections on themselves sometimes, or the thoughts that they had, or the thoughts that peers had at the different time periods. So that was just a neat little signal about that I'd like to highlight.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I noticed something I noticed too is people work there for a while. They're like the length of time that people are working there is significant compared to what you notice with other companies. Okay. Does someone else want to talk about patterns at team level? Or should I keep going?
I can pop into this one. So at the team level, I mean, it was really clear that they valued being candid and honest. What's not working, sharing ideas around what does. There was one blog I read in particular around this idea of like, they had talked to someone who had chosen to leave. They're honest about people who have left, and they actually have, honoring remarks of the contributions that they made. So even if they're blogging about something after that person's left, and so that honesty I thought was really interesting. The hiring process, I read one blog article about emphasizing values. Right at the front end, they're doing a bit of a values, a screen of sorts, and they talked a little bit about how they tried to evolve that and how imperfect that is, which is another of that element of that honesty of like how imperfect they feel it still is, but why they do it, and why they value it. And then the number of experiments they run with their organizational structure, and how they've talked about that org structure and how it's evolved, the relationships, the practices, dialogue about flat and hierarchy and natural hierarchies, and what happens when you rip everything out, and what happens when you allow things to come in, and what happens when you don't help and do things. And so I want to leave that to you guys to discover, but go take a look at their experiments and some of the links in here around the retrospectives against the different experiments with holacracy, teal organization, and stuff like that. Anything else, Camilla and Mary, you'd like to add about team section?
Yeah, just expanding on that, they do talk a lot about where they fall flat as like a remote culture and all the challenges related to being in this kind of nomadic remote culture. But I love, like, they get down to even in their knowledge, like in the knowledge sharing that they do, they have even tactical like Trello boards that are the best or favorites of people. It's just really inspirational. The amount of content that they're sharing amongst themselves, amongst the teams.
Quick question: How do we know how many employees they have at the minute?
On LinkedIn, there's about a little under 200.
That's it. That sounds about right.
So, Camilla, do you want to talk about ecosystem level?
Yeah, sure. So some of the patterns that I noticed at the ecosystem level is that they're very much like have adopted like trial and error. And in the beginning there were a lot of misconceptions around self-management and what it means to work in a flat environment. So like there's this misconception that if it's self-managed, then it means that we throw out everything. And then when they did that, they quickly realized that it also doesn't work, and people felt disempowered by it. And this is actually to the point that Brian was making earlier, that was the year when one of the employees have left. So that was also like a wake up call and wake up moment for them, from which they've learned quickly. And they also like realized that you still need a structure to follow, and even if it means that it develops organically, you still need a structure in a workplace. And there's also
I'll just actually read the summary here. There's system-wide transparency for compensation to revenue to values to product roadmaps. Like, that was pretty awesome. Like, at no other company did I see that. Notice that no one makes less than 69,000 annually, and the level of happiness is maintained through this like radical transparency, really. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And,
yeah. So cool. You guys should check out the transparency dashboard.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I'll speak to that last bullet point because I think it was mine, and it was this pragmatic and cautious external involvement, particularly around investors, to protect the values and purpose really stood out. There was an article recently about their 3.3 million buyback of their Series A investors, who they even back then carefully curated to be a purpose-aligned Series A investor, and the work that they did to understand that, you know, when they weren't feeling as aligned, and then how they came up with a plan to ensure that, you know, those investors felt honored and whole, and at the same time they were able to maintain their focus on their purpose and continued evolution and story. And so that to me was really fascinating in terms of how pragmatic they were about the externals they were involving in order to preserve their values.
That's awesome, team. Thanks so much. Lucky last, Koru team.
Is that the name that we decided on? Koru?
Oh, sorry. I just I don't know if you'd looked at the team documents. I'd named you, but you don't have to use the names that I gave you.
Oh no, I like it.
Sorry.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, cool.
I'm going to nominate Tanya, but I don't know if you're open to Tanya as like a leader, but because I feel like you would be really strong at that. But I'm up for other alternatives too.
What I can do is I can kind of share from like the research, and then what I might do is call on you and Malky to just sort of chime in, like where I'm maybe missing a few pieces, and also to chime in with your perspectives as well. So we went with Incentro. They're an IT solutions company. Being within the talent team, my very first instinct was to go to Glassdoor and actually have a look at sort of what some of the employees are doing. And I did sort of some research and sort of found a couple of articles as well. So these guys, like I said, they provide IT services, including design. They develop and manage websites, web shops, apps. They do data and marketing automation activities, and they are in the top 200 companies in the Netherlands. I think the company originally was a top-down hierarchical organization. And then I think when the downturn happened in 2002 to 2005, they decided to make some very big changes. And yeah, by 2012, they said that their number one priority would be the happiness of their staff. So they actually kind of went from a traditional organization and then moved to a flat organization. They are self-organizing. They decide their own salaries. They have a labs team, which is similar to our labs team, like an internal innovation team. And they work in cells of 60 people or less. So when I was kind of looking at their website and looking at Glassdoor, I think a couple of things that popped out from an individual level. It seems like on their website there's kind of this forward-facing information that's being shared of like, you get given a lot of autonomy, you get given a lot of freedom. You will set your own hours, you set your own salary. We're putting trust in you. On the back end, sort of what's coming in from the employees was a little bit of tension around kind of joining the organization, but not kind of having a clear trajectory or clear understanding of, how they could move forward. And I think that question sort of popped up for, like, we talked about it as a group, and I think, there's kind of a point, I think, in self-organizing organizations where it's up to the individual to decide, like, they have to look out for themselves and they have to decide what their needs are and what it is they're trying to gain. Like, no one's going to do it for you. And really, it like, the experience is really what you make it. So that was kind of an interesting contrast to see. Malki, Saraswati, I don't know if you had anything more to add from the individual perspective.
Yeah, I felt like I definitely enjoyed the tension of looking at Glassdoor versus looking at the forward-facing materials. And thinking, I think it's really interesting that maybe it was Inspiral or maybe it was Buffer, but someone has a blog where they're really documenting the challenges of trying to create a self-organizing system or non-system, because it's an easy thing to say, but it's really, it was cool to look under the hood and see that there are just some parallel struggles that people are experiencing, and it was also a really good conversation for us about consensus, and we all have been there for really different periods of time, so it was nice to reflect on our own individual experiences so far. So,
Malki, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think just in agreement with everything that you guys have said.
Cool. So then we looked at the team level, and actually, this is, again, so they work in cells across a network, and they talked a lot about, like, fostering connection and collaboration through in-person events and retreats. So, and that is kind of across the board between sort of the Glassdoor and then their sort of forward-facing team. Saraswati or Malki, I don't know if you wanted to add anything on the team level.
I think personally on a team level is where I saw just the really strong parallels with what we're working through at Consensus. So that was definitely interesting. But just again, sort of echoing what the others have been saying, where for all the forward-facing, the Glassdoor pieces weren't necessarily knocking them down, but they were kind of breaking, digging deeper and saying, what does autonomous mean? And to that end, often it read as challenges, right, which ended up turning into, like, pain points for certain employees. And they just read as, like, really obviously relatable for either what we've experienced or are just aware of is going on here at our own organization. So just equally interesting. One thing I did notice is that, so you were talking about, we saw employees were saying there's no traditional trajectory because there's no hierarchy. And I made a note that seems to be something that Consensus is doing, I think, really well. There's definitely not the process in place, but that sort of space for anyone to kind of lean into something that interests them or where they find a strength that aligns with their skill set to say, hey, I want to participate, or hey, here's where I can add value. It seems to be that this is an area that there really is like some amazing space for. So I think that's for all the, I guess personally, for all the, I'm a processes person, and so I tend to notice what's not working more obviously. And so for all that, I also want to like shout out ourselves too for something that does seem to be really positive. So yeah.
Great. And then, yeah, just a couple of points around the ecosystem. I know we've only got sort of a minute left. Something that, yeah, we sort of picked up was they talk a lot about like having a net promoter score by sort of giving surveys out to their clients to see like how happy their clients are. And then another thing is that we noticed is that they tend to hire not on the basis of just your title, but they're hiring also on the basis of human potential. Like they want to see your other interests and experiences. And I think that, yeah, like I think that that's super important. And actually that kind of reflected a point to me because I work within the talent team of speaking to my team about, you know, are we questioning candidates, or are we encouraging hiring managers to question candidates around their potential? Like, what are they interested in? What are they doing outside of their actual role? So this is a conversation that I kind of want to take back to my team when we do our OKR meeting, so that like this is something to be flagged. And Saraswati has made contact with the guys at Incentro, so we're hoping to have a call with them next week. And then, yeah, we've also got some questions that we've sort of pulled together for our own teams and the mesh more widely. And then, yeah, Melki, Saraswati, if you've got anything additional that you'd like to add, please.
I think we might be at time. The one thing that I wanted to add was I thought it was really interesting to think about the metrics that they're employing. For them, it was client happiness and employee happiness. And we talked about the shortcomings of a net promoter score as a as a feedback mechanism. But feedback mechanisms in general seem like a really fascinating place to explore when researching how people are sort of gauging the success of their organization at all of these levels, individual, team, and ecosystem. So
cool. Thanks, everybody. Is Edwin one of the humans that you're going to be talking to next week? Edwin Banda Hees? Or not? He's pretty cool. He actually did the public-facing version of this course about a year ago. So.
At Incentro?
Yeah, Incentro, yeah.
I don't know. What was his name, Saraswati? He connected us to somebody. I forget the name of the guy. I can pull it up in the email.
Great. Wow. Thank you all so much for today. I'm feeling like my heart's swelling because we're in it now. It's happening and it feels really good. So I'd like to just do a quick checkout. I'll call on people. The invitation is 1 or 2 words about how you're feeling right now. I'm feeling privileged and excited. Mary.
Yeah, I'm feeling inspired and excited too. Yeah. Thank you.
Brian.
Peaceful, but inspired.
Edson.
I feel curious. I would like to learn more how to bring this to my team.
Malky.
Whoops, I'm on mute. I apologize. I am going to go with fascinated.
Camilla.
Feeling apprehensive about the level of excitement that I'm experiencing. Sorry.
That's honest. I like that.
Josh.
I'm feeling inspired and excited.
Tanya?
My head's going in 1,000 places because I am trying to figure out what can I action as soon as possible to make change.
Saraswati?
Curious.
And Samantha?
I'm feeling good.
Have a stunning weekend, everyone. I look forward to you publishing over the weekend in the shared Google Drive. And so next Monday, the special guest is Doug Kirkpatrick from the Self-Management Institute. There's several links in the documents about him and about his work. If you maybe just wanted to take some time, if you do have time to think about questions for him. I'm in Jakarta, so I'm not going to be on the call, but Lisa and Kate will be hosting you on Monday, and I'll be back to see you all next Friday. So, bon chance, have a great weekend, and lots of love. See you soon.
Bye.